the 11th century, invasions by the Seljuk Turks and the subsequent expansion of the Ottoman Turkish Empire claimed most of historic Armenia, the first Christian nation. The Armenians became a subjugated people in their ancestral homeland. Although they contributed greatly to the prosperity of the Ottoman Empire, the Armenians were subjected to discriminatory laws and practices, culminating in the massacres of the late 1800s. In 1878, the Congress of Berlin imposed demands for reform on the Ottoman Empire, and Armenians and other persecuted minorities were allowed the freedom to leave the country. At this time, groups of Armenians began to arrive in America. They were mostly young, single men, or husbands who had left their families, sometimes for years at a time, to earn a living with the hope of returning to provide for a better life.
In 1867, one Armenian named Garo came to the United States as the servant of an American missionary, went to Worcester, lived in Worcester, and the story is that he was working for something like $1 a week. He then learned from a friend that he could make that amount of money in a day in the Worcester wire mills. So he left that employment, and it was through Garo, through what we call chain migration, that relatives and friends of his would start coming.
Worcester, Massachusetts became the first Armenian settlement in America. The early immigrants there worked at wire mills, such as the Washburn and Moen Manufacturing Company. In the 1880s, Armenians began arriving in Fresno, California.
In most cases, immigrants would come to the United States and work in the eastern seaboard, anywhere from Portland, Maine, through Boston, Worcester, Providence, all the way down to Baltimore. And what they would do is, after a number of years, usually working in the factories, they would save up enough money to go to California. And what comes out of the immigrant press is the work in the factories was so debilitating, exhausting, and under very, very dangerous conditions, that you get the feeling of great weariness and poor health consumption. And so many of these immigrants went to California for the climate. Now, the first who went there, as far as we know, were the Seropian brothers in 1881.
Armenians initially pursued agriculture as farm workers, growing raisins, then leasing and eventually purchasing land and owning companies, which provided the packing and distribution of fruits and vegetables.
When the women came, there were some problems of adjustment because the men had learned something about American ways, whereas the women were still old country Deans. And there were many cases during the massacres when husbands had been killed in the old country, women would bring children and they would become the breadwinners and the heads of the family. The largest concentration of women working took place in Troy, New York. One wouldn't think of Troy, New York, but there was a large community there, and it was called the Shirt Manufacturing Center of the United States. And the reason for that was that they could work at home. They would rent these the sewing machines, take them at home, and they would do piecework. And they preferred to do this. They didn't want to go in the factories because these women came from sequestered, secluded families in the old country with strict morals, and swearing and rough language was not tolerated. And then they get thrown into a factory, and this would appall their husbands and their families.
From 1894 to 1896, massacres ordered by Sultan Abdul Hamid II resulted in the deaths of some 200,000 Armenians in Ottoman Turkey. Many refugees of these killings fled to the United States, and about 5,000 of them settled in Massachusetts.
According to the Massachusetts census of 1905, the three largest communities in Massachusetts for Armenians were starting with Worcester, Boston, and Watertown. But it's interesting that there were also many others like Haverhill, Lawrence, Lowell, Milford, Whitensville. Lynn had a large shoe business.
Some 40 Armenians found work at a new factory that had opened in Watertown. George Henry Hood of Chelsea, Massachusetts, was a rubber goods salesman and businessman during the latter half of the 19th century. In 1877, he founded the Boston Rubber Company, which, along with 11 other corporations, consolidated to become the United States Rubber Company in 1892. George's sons, Frederick and Arthur Hood, assumed the task of searching for a location for their own prospective rubber company.
Our grandfathers, my grandfather's name was Frederick, and his grandfather's name was Arthur. It was Frederick Hood and Arthur Hood, were co-founders of the Hood Rubber Company.
So these were young entrepreneurs. Their father, George, had sent Frederick to Harvard, but my grandfather was trained as a chemical engineer. So far as I understand, was the technical person, and Uncle Fred would have been the, as Betty said, the moving force.
The Hood brothers were convinced by a group of local businessmen that Watertown would be an ideal location for their plant. Proximity to the Port of Boston and the railroad was essential, such as the Fitchburg Railroad's Watertown branch, which was already serving the United States Arsenal there. Flowing through East Watertown, Solon's Brook provided ample water supply, and a large labor force existed in the surrounding communities. On October 12, 1896, the Hood Rubber Company was incorporated for the production of footwear and soon constructed its buildings on Nichols Avenue. By 1897, 3,000 shoes per day were being produced. The company attracted unskilled workers from various immigrant ethnic groups, including the Armenians.
And at the same time, there's this huge migration of immigrants from the Middle East and from Southern Europe, the Eastern European Jews, the Italians, the Greeks, the Syrians, and the Armenians, unskilled labor. And the two work together. The factory owners now want to produce mass goods. They're part of a huge international market, and they want to produce them as quickly as possible and cheaply as possible, so that they now industrialize so that the machines can be tended by unskilled labor. They don't need craftsmen to sew shoes. They have machines to do that. With this huge pool of unskilled laborers coming in, systematically in city after city and town after town, and in factory towns, manufacturers were doing their best to get rid of their higher-priced, English-speaking, Irish, well-established artisans and factory workers to get immigrants, because they would come at a third or a half the price.
The threat of this incursion of foreigners compelled the American-born Hood employees to demand the firing of these immigrant laborers. However, the company rejected this plea. The Armenians had proven to be good workers, receiving low pay while toiling for long hours.
We think of Hood Rubber as an Armenian factory. It really wasn't. Armenians constituted probably 5 to 7% of the workforce. But had Hood Rubber not existed, there would have been a huge community in Chelsea or in Providence or in Portland or in Camden, New Jersey. There were Armenian communities there.
By the turn of the century, the word had spread even as far as the Armenian provinces of the Ottoman Empire that there was work to be found at Hood Rubber. The new Ottoman constitution was implemented by the Young Turk regime in 1908. At this time, another wave of Armenians made its way to America.
And there's hope by the Armenians that things have changed, the new day. Throughout the Armenian world, there are parades and celebrations.
However, a year later, the massacres of 30 to 40,000 Armenians, beginning at Adana and leading to the Armenian Genocide of 1915, precipitated the largest movement ever of Armenians to America.
They had deep roots in Armenia, their families, their culture, and so forth. So they always said at the top of their minds, we have to return, we're going to return. And yet, as they become more a culture to America, as they get jobs, as they have families, as they own property, and they see the deterioration of conditions in Turkey, they're settling, and even against their best intentions, there's no way that they're going to return. So the die, even before the First World War and the terrible genocide, the die is cast.
By 1916, there were approximately 800 Armenians living in Watertown. According to the Rubber Trade Directory of 1916, trademark names of various hood rubber shoe models included the Adana, Aleppo, Beirut, Erzurum, Kayseri, Merzina, and Smyrna, apparently in tribute to the homeland of its Armenian workers, or to attract sales from their countrymen.
These two brothers started out, and apparently they must have gotten along for a while, but I think their temperaments and their strengths didn't complement each other in some ways, and tensions arose, and there was a falling out. And Arthur left the company. I think if you might say my grandfather Frederick kicked him out. I don't know, but I do know that there was a great falling out between the two brothers.
Adding tires to its product line, the Hood Rubber Company expanded production along with the Watertown Arsenal to accommodate the military buildup during World War I. By the end of the war, the factory was employing 10,000 workers. Homes were purchased and land was taken for additions to the plant. The company had a research laboratory, believed to be the first of its kind in the nation. The Boston Elevated Street Railway even built a trolley loop at Mount Auburn Street and Bigelow Ave to accommodate workers commuting from Harvard Square in Cambridge. Hood Rubber owned and operated the Abraham Lincoln House on Arlington Street, where immigrant workers aspiring for citizenship learned English. There was a clinic there providing minor surgery and dental care. It was a progressive company and had learned from the infamous Bread and Roses strike of 1912 in Lawrence, Massachusetts, that workers' rights needed to be acknowledged, and as a result, the few strikes that took place there were only partially effective. During the early 1920s, the peak of Armenian immigration, Hood employed about 500 Armenian workers, and by the end of the decade, there would be 3,500 Armenians living in Watertown, almost 10% of the town's population. One of them, Vostanig Adoyan, more commonly known as the artist Arshil Gorky, worked at the factory for a few months until he was fired for practicing his art on the roof of the factory and drawing on the soles of shoes.
I was 12 years old when my parents took me to Hosmer School to learn how to speak English. And then, 16 years old, I got into Hood Rubber. I was a cementer. I was cementing the shoes. I was happy because I was making $18, $20 and no money coming in, and you know, and the rent is so much. Oh, when I was single, I used to give it to my mother. 25 cents she gave me to spend. She'd say, Yavrum, she'd say, what can I do? She said, we have to make dolma, we gotta make this, we gotta get our good. We didn't even have any electricity when I came in Watertown. But I remember milkman coming with a horse and buggy. Iceman, they horse and buggy. There's no automobiles, nobody had a car. Well, you know, Eddie, we used to go from Hosmer School home, from home to Hosmer School, back and forth, from factory to factory. You didn't even take a walk to see. They wouldn't even let you go out, your family. They say, oh, no, Mirtar, oh, Mirtar, you know. You just stay. That's 80 years ago. 80 years ago I was here.
In 1929, on the eve of the Great Depression, B.F. Goodrich acquired the Hood Rubber Company, which became its Hood Rubber Division. The parent company went into decline for the first time in decades as the demand for rubber diminished. Those fortunate enough to retain a job endured harsh working conditions, typical of those in most factories of the Northeast.
Some girls' wrists are so sore that they work in constant pain all day. Their fingers are so worn from pulling at the rough, coarse, rubberized cloth that they bleed constantly. Many women arrive early, get attended to by the company nurse, and then they go to work.
And of course, like I said, this is what happened on the conveyor. One day, I was putting tennis shoes on the conveyor and it's going around. Something fell right at near the wheel, I think it was. I went to pull it out. I wasn't fast enough or whatever. It went right on my finger. So, everybody came. I think I fainted, and they stopped the conveyor, and the man came and took my finger off. And he said right away he took me to the nurse, and they tied it up and everything, And then they said, well, tomorrow come back to work. But I didn't know any better that you stay home and you sue them or this and that.
She used to be Edith Soul Samantha. She was able to work fast enough, and they pay her by the pay she produced. She was run over by one of those carts that they push around the plant.
The air is thick with chemical dust, and it settles on everything and everyone in the room. God knows how many pounds of multicolored dust a worker has ingested in a year.
One of the innovations of the Hood Rubber Company that continued under B.F. Goodrich was the sneaker test, a practice which many East Watertown residents fondly remember.
I was probably about 11 years old, so that would be about 1936, 1937, in that era. I was at Coolidge School. Do you know what Coolidge School is, don't you? And we used to get out early on Wednesdays. You waited in line on the steps leading up to the door until they opened the door and let us in. And we would go in, and they would say, well, we have this size or that size or that size, and if it was your size, then you would get the shoes, the sneakers. And then you would have to come in every Wednesday, and they would check them to see how they wore, and so forth and so on. And then when it wore out, then you were issued another pair. I had small feet, so it was almost an impossibility for me to ever fit into a sneaker. I don't even know if I ever got a sneaker. But faithfully, I was there every Wednesday because I wanted a pair of sneakers, and my family couldn't afford to buy me a pair. And there was a family with, as I said, with 5 kids that lived on the first floor. So one of the boys had gone up for test, and he saw that there was a size there that was my size, and he came running from the Hood Rubber to get me. Oh, come, they have your size. And we ran to get back to the Hood Rubber to get my sneakers. And you'd wait in line, Wednesday after Wednesday, waiting in line, hoping that you could get a pair of sneakers. Can you see kids doing that today? Week after week. This was Depression years.
I never got there in time to get the free ones, so I would come back disappointed. Well, my mother never liked sneakers because she said it wasn't good for your feet. You've got to wear leather shoes. So I remember to this day, but I have rubber sneakers now.
I must have been 12, 13. I used to wait in front of the Hood Rubber on the steps. We used to stand in line, all of us, whoever was there, and we used to wait 2 to 3 hours. You tried to get on the top to get in first. I got a new pair of sneakers every week because I worked so hard running around and doing so much that I was the best test girl. But Mr. Barrett was one of the men at the Hood Rubber. And he used to drive to my house and have all these boxes of sneakers and say, Rose, I got another pair for you. He'd take the old one, he'd see how it wore out. They'd look to see what part of the heel wore out, what part of the toe wore out. And me being so active, because my mother had me running all day. Chanot vazeh. Hatspad, Gatpad, Chemkedinchpad. I'm in Vargan. Every minute, it was vaze, vaze, vaze. My mother never used any other word with me but vaze. And that's why I never stopped.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
It was a little depressing. Everybody's crying. There's children are gone in the service, and no money coming in, and everybody had sadness. There was more women working there than men. Hood Rubber was all women working. As far as I know, the girls that worked around me, their husbands were in the service, they stayed there. They didn't leave. When I worked in the Hood Rubber, one week I worked nighttime, 1 week daytime. Was through the war. I was working during the war. I was making rubber boots for the 14, 16 size big rubber boots for the Army. They used to make raincoats. They made raincoats that Gregory Adamian that I'm talking about, he's a lawyer, he did that work.
And in 1945, during the war years, I was still going to school. I was 16 years old, and I had a chance to work at the Hood Rubber Company for the summer months. We worked on the buffing machines. We would roughen up the inner part of the sole so that when the cement was applied, it would stick to the canvas sneaker. It wasn't a very hard job, but it was boring. I enjoyed working there because a certain amount of camaraderie, and we were all working for the war effort.
I used to make rafts. That was during the war. I had put the hood on it, where they can shelter themselves. They had glue on it. You'd wet the glue down and get the hood and tap it all around the whole thing so it'd stick a little, and then you had to make sure you did it right because all those people at the in the sea were safe, How many people used to skip the amounts of cement that they'd put on their work? Yeah. Instead of having 5 coats of cement, they would put on 2, 3, and that thing wouldn't stay. The thing would sink. She worked in the lifeboats, and all of a sudden I heard her screaming because I was near her, and I ran over. You have to keep the cover closed all the time because if you put your hand in naphtha when it's open, it'll ignite. The friction. It was open when she went into it, and the thing just blew. Her hand got all burned and scarred and everything. She was only a young girl when that happened. She come flying up to me, Anita! Something always looking for Anita. This is the truth. Anita, so she's telling me I have to put my hand in the can. I says, oh no you don't. I went right up to Mr. Whittemore, and I told him, and he took her off of it.
During World War II, working at the Hood Rubber, we used to get books of coupons from the government. And you can only get so many coupons per family. Well, we were 3 girls and we wore stockings. We didn't have enough coupons for nylons. It was awful. So we used to have to wear torn stockings, and we used to wear a little longer skirts so the tear wouldn't show. But it was hard. And when we had coupon for butter, you couldn't buy butter the way you wanted to, and all that stuff. So my mother used to make homemade lard. She used to cook pilav in homemade lard. Of course, it was the tastiest damn pilav you ever had. We had to carry it on because of the war. Because, see, we started at 3, 5 o'clock we had our break, and then we worked till 7. And then 7 o'clock, I just would go home. Of course, I used to do my homework in school, so I couldn't do homework at night. I didn't have time, didn't have the energy. And I worked with all black people standing right next to me, especially during the war, They needed workers because the boys were all gone. And so these black women were so good. They were such good workers. Never did anyone say anything about them. It was hard times. It was very hard times. Until Roosevelt would get on the news and give us a little hope. He'd give us a little hope. Lines of people getting out of the streetcar and going to work constantly. And you know what? They loved their jobs, though. It wasn't like they were dreading it. But yeah, they used to walk from Monauban down Bigelow directly to the Hood Rubber. It would take you directly to the big entrance of the Hood.
The sight of men going to work and coming back from work carrying their black lunch pails. You know, these were these black rectangular boxes with a round top. Within the top was the thermos bottle, and below maybe it was llama jam or who knows what, spinach pie, all sorts of good things to eat.
A lot of them worked either at Condasians or at the Hood Rubber. And don't forget, I worked at the Union Market National Bank, which I dealt with all these Armenian people coming in. The bank would close at 2 o'clock every day. We would reopen at 3 to allow these people that worked at the Hood Rubber to be able to come and do their banking.
Under the Bedeau Point system, also known as piecework, the speed of the conveyor belts was increased.
They're all on the conveyor ready to work. Okay, and then the first person on the other end of the conveyor sats the shoe. And then it goes down the line all the way to the end where they put the outsole on and it's finished. Each turn of the wheel, or whatever you want to call it, an operator put something on it until it got to the end of the conveyor.
Well, I was such a good worker, I was so fast, that they made me a spare, meaning I learned every job on the whole conveyor. The toe, the heel, every part of the sneaker or the rubber. And if you hold it up, if you don't feel good or you're tired, everyone gets angry at you and they want you off because you had to make so many pairs a night. They call those tickets. On the ticket, if it said 500 size 8, you had to do 500 pairs of size 8 that night.
It's all piecework. The more you made, you get good money. They would have a sheet of paper of work to do and tell you how many points that you would get for each kind of work. The more points you had, the more money you would get. So that was good that way. And if you had any errors to make, you would correct it yourself, and you would get credit for that too.
There is a bunch of young college boys who never made a shoe in their life, wearing white shirts and neatly pressed pants. They time every job, keeping their eyes on a stopwatch.
I was in charge of the manufacture of sneakers, rubbers, rubber boots, and things like that. They made me a foreman over there, and where I was in charge of 6 conveyor belts. I had probably about 60, 65 people under my jurisdiction. I started something over there that had not been done before, and I had blackboards overlooking each one of the conveyor belts. I listed the percentage or numbers so they knew what they were doing right or wrong. You know, something wrong with the shoe becomes a reject or a second. You lose that first rate classification. It was an indicator about the quality of their work, the quality of their production.
Like John Peronian, what's his name there? Yeah, he was good. He was one of the guys that did the timekeeping, you know. And a few times I said, what are you rushing, putting the conveyor up higher? And he'd say, well, honey, that's progress. You're working. Say, you have 800 shoes to make today. And so one woman would stand over there with a paper and pencil, and they look at how 1 second or 2 seconds it takes to make one shoe. The conveyor was going faster now, you know, and you're making more points. Before, if you made 400, now you're making 600 shoes a day. You could hardly keep up. You couldn't even breathe. Some people are slow, some are fast. So I would even make shoes, about 12 shoes ahead, pile it up, and I'll have a girl put it in for me. I'm going to ladies' room. Otherwise, you never get to ladies' room.
I never took a break. We never took breaks. We only went to the ladies' room and then we came right back. In fact, I lost my high school ring in the bathroom. And I was very fast. And everybody would say to me, now when they come and evaluate you, don't work so fast. Some of the older ladies and girls. And I said, okay, so I just took my time.
Because some of them would fool around and try to fool the timekeeper.
How can they do that? I mean,
just go slow. But everybody knew I worked fast, so they'd come up to me. And I'd say, don't give me the business now.
If I had to guess, I'd say about 75% of the workforce were foreigners. And there were a lot of immigrants at Hood Rubber at that time, many Portuguese from Cambridge. I had a feeling for those people. They had a language barrier, a lot of them, but they worked very hard, they really did. It wasn't easy work. And I was helpful to them, you know, because of my own parents, you know what I mean?
There were a lot of Irish. This is the office I'm saying, French, Irish, English.
And it provided employment not only for the Armenians, but for Greeks and Italians who populated East Watertown.
At the Hood Rubber, there were two women that were neighbors of mine on Quimby Street, Mrs. Gulbenkian and Mrs. Moradian. We were always laughing, and they would always kid around with me, and they would call me Bubby. That was my name, Bubby. In a loving way.
They used to lay the stocks on the table, long stocks of material on the table, and the cutter on a machine would cut that work, and I would be inspecting it as a caser, and throw out the good and keep the good and tie them up and put them on trucks, not on trucks, on like racks, to go upstairs in the stitching room to be stitched. There was a lot of Armenians in the stitching room, like I remember Arison there worked up there, Beatrice, what was her name? Beatrice English worked there. She was Armenian. Sarabian worked up there. There's a lot of Armenians in the stitching room.
They knew how to sew.
They knew how to sew. Those machines, I know, I used to go up there to watch them, and it was so noisy, you couldn't hear one another talk to each other, because those machines were going constantly.
Well, I can remember many times when especially this stitching room, when I'd go by there, I could hear women say, Daran Haya. You know what I mean? They all knew I was Armenian. Of course, I knew artists in there. I knew Mrs. Sanitary and Lillian, and Juicy Samuelian's father worked there for years. Rosemary Mission's father worked there. And so I got to meet a few Armenians in my operation over there as the inspector once a month. Some would stop and ask me where my folks were from in the old country.
We used to have parties, we used to have birthday parties. If we knew their birthdays, we would celebrate and have coffee and cake and sing songs, happy birthday.
They gave, the girls in the office gave me wonderful gifts, wedding gifts.
They had doctors there. Yeah. If you were sick, you go down, they would give you pills or they would take care of you.
Yeah, yeah.
They had a dentist there too.
Yeah.
They would check up on your teeth if you had problems. They would take good care of you, or they would give you medicine. If you needed it, they would give it to you. They took good care of you.
I thought they gave good benefits.
No, no benefits. No, you just got a paycheck. No benefits. You just punched out and left and went home. That was the end of that. Until you came the next day again, punched the clock again. We had to punch in because then no one dared punch you by mistake. Like, you know, I'm not going to work today. Would you punch me in so I can get paid? They never did do that. No, no, no.
And if we had to go someplace, we would have somebody punch you out so you wouldn't lose your time. You know, if you had to go somewhere, want to go somewhere, we'll say, Lois, punch me out. We'll go early.
You know, I'm just going to say this because I have no facts, but the health issues that may be related to this, and to my knowledge, no one has ever blamed the Hood Rubber Company for this, but I just have to say, my uncle died of cancer. My other uncle died of cancer. We've had a lot of cancer in the family. We all of us grew up in lived near around the Hood Rubber, but we also lived near Lewis and Shepherd and the arsenal and the nuclear reactor and, you know, God knows what else.
It was one of the last real sweatshops, I think, around in Massachusetts, and I think if OSHA walked in there today, they'd probably have a heart attack.
It was a working place. It made money for people, but it also wasn't a healthy situation for the town of Watertown. And it showed up years and years later. As we know, our parents, my mother had breast cancer, my aunt had breast cancer.
So I used to type on they used to call it a hectograph typewriter. It made a lot of copies, and it was a special ribbon. I started getting blue all under my armpit. It was going into wherever you sweat. So, to this day, I think maybe that's what caused my breast cancer, because it's on that side.
I had sarcoidosis from the BF cougars. Well, I never knew I had it. Something to do with the dust in the air get into your lungs. It's still there. I still have that spot in my lungs.
When I was working on the soles of the sneakers, buffing them, of course there was a hood on the buffing machine, and the residue would build up on the inside of the hood. Well, I was tall enough so that when the residue let go after a while, it would hit me in the chest. And all I would do is brush it off. Well, my friend Adam was shorter than I, and when it let go, it would hit him right in the face. And I would have to get the air machine and stand back a while and then blow it off. His eyes would be shut and hurry up. He would say, hurry up to get it off me. And I'd blow it off and everybody would laugh. But used the wrong way, that could be a very dangerous weapon.
He was cutting something, maybe one of those cutting machines. And he put his hand under and the clamp for the safety part of it didn't work. It was broken or something, so his hand got stuck under there. And they said he was screaming for bloody murder for I don't know how long. They said you could hear his screams everywhere. They couldn't open it, and it just cut his arm off. It was horrible.
The most industrialized town in the United States, Watertown, Massachusetts. It was something that we were always very proud of. But in the backyard, you could always see the Hood Rubber chimney sort of looming over us. And at certain times of the day, they would spew out smoke. And so I remember the Hood Rubber chimney, and it said Hood Rubber on it.
At night, they would blow everything out. It would come out of the chimney, and there would be little black soot. And the poor people in the neighborhood could not go around and hang any clothes.
Grandmother used to hang clothes out, and the clothes used to come in gray or black. The soot that came out of that chimney was so bad that it would cover the cars, it would cover everything. It was even oily soot on the ground.
The health department came down, they looked at it, and then the state came down, and they didn't do anything about it. They said everything is all right.
And we had big garden, which to me would be like right next to an industrial sewer pit. You know, I mean, the garden was right there, maybe 40 feet away, maybe 60 feet away from the garden was the railroad tracks with the trains and the diesel.
Yeah. But that line was very active, and we were always fascinated by the switchers and the cars and all the different railroad activity, and the arsenal had
The clothing smelled of the hood rubber. You could tell that they were hood rubber workers. I could tell my neighbors who worked in the hood rubber and who didn't.
Yeah, I used to come home from work and my clothes would be smelling of rubber. Smelling of rubber. It'd be horrible. Well, it goes into your pores. It goes into your pores. You know, the whole place smelled rubber.
anyone who lived in East Watertown, Dexter Ave, Quimby Street, Hazel Street, Oak Street, etc., the smell of burning rubber pervaded our childhood and our lives. There was open flame burning. And there was smoke from that. You know, why everyone doesn't have lung disease is pretty amazing. No one cared, you know, carcinogens, and, you know, I have to wonder, the, you know, black smoke spewing out and the smells and all that. You get used to it. You know, like, it doesn't bother me. Burning rubber doesn't bother me now.
The smell of burning rubber was like waking up in the morning and smelling leaves or grass. If the wind was right, or maybe I should say if the wind was wrong, you could get a combination of burning rubber, the smell of the stockyards in Brighton, and the burning fires of junk in the Watertown dump all combined. Did that bother us? No, it was just as normal as apple pie.
In 1947, the Hood Rubber division of the B.F. Goodrich Company offered a new line of sneakers called Posture Foundation, PF Flyers, a pioneering development in the modern sneaker industry.
We used to sometimes get other kinds of things they were really testing, but PF Flyers would be the desirable ones to get. If you can get red PF Flyers with the white ankle logo on it, that was even better. Sneaker test. I mean, for a kid, I never knew that it was actually what it was. And obviously, they were testing the wearability of the sneakers they made. We thought it was just a handout. So then, you know, we always were angry if we didn't get new sneakers. We thought we should get new sneakers every week. And if we ever did get new sneakers, they didn't actually tell you you could have this one, that one. They would give you whatever they wanted to give you. And of course, we all believed that if we had new sneakers, we could run faster, jump higher, play baseball better. I suppose the wearability of Hood Rubber's products was all based on the activities of Watertown kids.
So I was just saying that when we went to that sneaker test, you try to get those sneakers. If you could get lucked out and got the ones with the Bob Cousy with the big green tip on them, we were extra happy at the end of that day. And you didn't really like to turn those in because we didn't get those all the time. A lot of times you got the plain sneakers. Well, you used to do it, I used to do it. Don't you remember during the week before you show up, we used to ride our bikes and drag our feet?
Yeah, we get the sneakers old. Then bring them in so we get another pair for nothing.
Right. We used to try to get new ones every week so that when you went to school you had real white, nice, clean sneakers.
When I went to Alaska in the service in 1957, 58, I was stationed in Alaska. We had with these big boots, B.F. Goodrich, Hood Rubber.
Oh my God, yeah. I made these big boots myself.
Every now and then, if the wind was right, if things were quieter in the neighborhood, you could hear the sounds of music. I had no idea at the time as a kid where the music came from, but it could almost have been a heavenly sound. Or you didn't really hear it, but it sounded like the faint call or song of a woman softly singing. It was magic. And yes, it was probably a factory PA system broadcasting a song for the benefit of the workers, but to us it was fairyland. We turned it into magic. It was a faraway, beautiful woman singing a song to us.
You know, we lived in a factory town, a lot of activity. We saw drunks fighting all the time and things like that. There was a lot of activity going on. And in the middle of the night, there'd be shift changes, and if we were out at night before the lights came on, we could see all that. There was always a lot of traffic, sort of traffic jams, and it had a huge effect on our lives.
Another thing we'd often do is stand at the corner of Laurel Street, at the intersection of Laurel and Lundy Avenue, and right there behind the fence was what was a metal casting operation run by a man who looked like he might have been from East Europe or perhaps the Middle East somewhere, Armenia or Greek perhaps. And he would run his machine. I know it involved something hot, and we'd yell out, "Hey, mister, toss us one, toss us one." Usually he'd wave us away and say, "Get out of here, you kids," or ignore us. Finally, if we persisted, and we usually did, he'd toss us one. What were they? They were little metal castings about an inch long, perhaps an inch in diameter, and they came out of the machine hot. We would grab one off the ground, he would toss it back and forth till it got reasonably easy to handle, and would play with it. What it was, we had no idea. What to do with it, we had no idea. But it was important to have one, and we did.
But we also, you know, if you walked up on Bigelow Ave, you could, right at the sidewalk level and below, I mean, you could stand on the sidewalk. We used to lie down on our belly and look at the window and watch people work. And I remember just one guy used to, I'm sure what he was doing was cutting out soles or something. He had a machine that had big things of rubber, flat panels of rubber, and he'd go, all day. And we'd watch this guy cut those soles. And I think we were always a little bit concerned that he would put his hand in there, because he had to put the machine down, it cut, and then pull things over and put it down again. And we were always concerned that we would see him hurt himself. We didn't know who he was, and we saw the same guy. He was like a sort of a local hero to us. We never saw him in the street, only in that one place. And he never knew that we were all so fascinated by what he did, because his window was always open.
One of the things we liked to do was to crawl under the fence. I believe the whole company was surrounded by what we'd call a chain link or a cyclone fence. And of course, every kid in the neighborhood knew where all the spots were you could crawl underneath. So on a nice warm summer day, we'd find our favorite crawl under spot and pull out an old used tire and roll that around the neighborhood. A prestigious find would be to get a white wall tire. Well, let's see, probably intersection of Quimby, Laurel, and Oak Street. There was a corner there. And there's a wall of the Hood Rubber Company. We'd mark a square on the wall, and we'd play pink ball.
We had a lot of liberty, and in the summer especially, we're free all day. Both my parents worked, so we're free all day, and we're running around Watertown, going into Hood Rubber, driving them crazy, going to sneaker tests, finding bottles, all that, going back and watching the guy cut soles. I think a large part of our social life was either at the Hood Rubber or at the dump. And that dump and that Hood Rubber was everything to us.
Although the company prospered in the post-war years, fewer and fewer Armenians turned to work at the factory as they pursued their own professions through college education and the GI Bill.
And the people who were working there, interestingly, to me anyway, in the 60s, were mostly minorities. And it was the same kind of work and the same kind of explanation of why the Armenians came. Middle-class Americans, well-educated, would not work in the factories.
In the late 50s and the early 60s, I worked in the canteen for Crotty Brothers, who was the food service provider for the Hood Rubber. I also worked on the wagon. The wagon was a food service wagon that was pulled around by one of the Hood employees so that we could reach into the bowels of the building where there were no canteens, and to bring food to those people in the satellite areas.
Sell my mother's tomatoes with my little red wagon outside the Hood Rubber when they all came out, and they'd all buy a tomato from me. We'd go to school, and after school go to the Hood Rubber, and they'd set me up with a canteen truck with coffee, sandwiches, milk, juices. And I used to take a truck and just drive it around. Then I'd get through at like 4:30, 5 o'clock and come home.
All I remember is I was 18 years old, graduated in June, and my mother says, go out and get a job. The B.F. Goodrich is right there. I was one of the young kids. I was probably the youngest girl in the office. So I went from my grandfather in the probably foundry, as they would call it, to my mother in the factory, you know, and then I was in the office, and I was probably making more money than my mother was after all those years. And I was only there briefly, you know, for a while, and then that's when it was starting to shut down. A lot of my bosses were going down to Lumberton, North Carolina.
Way back in 1968, when they were laying off and it was going down south, the company was moving down south.
The union meetings on Bigelow Avenue, the union would meet in, I think it was the Canadian Club right on Bigelow Avenue, right next to where B&G Sheet Metal is today. And they'd be going to meet with management, and they'd be strategizing and stuff like that. And the whole town was watching at the time, because they were such a large employer that they didn't want them to move out of town. And those negotiations went on for quite some time, and everybody was sort of hanging on the edge of their seat.
But we were asking the union what was going on. You know, the union kept raising our money for more money, and the company wouldn't accept it. So they were going down to looking for other places to do their work for less money, which was North Carolina. So little by little, we weren't getting the contracts that we should be getting originally. So they started laying off people that had, and they went by years of service, and what department was losing their contracts to work.
Well, as it started to phase out, like I was in the print shop, and then I went up to quality control, and from quality control I was shipped out to the building 62. That's where everybody left. When you get into building 62, that was it. They ship you out from there. They said to me, Nita, where are you going to go and where? I said, building 62. Oh, for God's sakes, one of the women said to me, for God's sakes, whatever you do, don't bother with those women. They were rougher than rough. God. But it was funny how one of the women warned me, don't talk to them, Anita. They're bad there.
And that building you're talking about, building 62, was really like a dungeon. All kinds of people in there. And, you know, you got to know some of them are really, you know, they were older people, but they worked very hard. It was a hard life in there. It looked like it was a prison when you went in there. That's how bad it looked.
Like I said, 62 is all where the trouble was. Like people getting burned, like they said, they lost their arms and stuff. Then when I went over building 62, I called that the Iron Curtain. I didn't like it at all there, because dirty work there, harder work there.
Well, you know, building 62 and building, I think it was 53 or 51, I actually worked in the canteens, and we would serve them, you know, whatever they wanted, and the breaks were short, but it was a motley crew of employees. You know.
They were a rowdy bunch.
Yeah,
I knew them all.
Well, we had.
Mm-hmm.
We get together, you know, and the bookies would come by, we would play and putting our numbers down. Then they would have a raffle once a week, and they'd have your clock number on it, and if your number came out, you get the money in a jackpot. Mm-hmm. You know, every Friday they would
My mother used to always tell me, play my clock number, 348. Play that number, play that number.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we had a lot of fun, good fun. Those were the good days.
Do you remember your clock number?
513 was my clock number, over in the cutting room. Then when I went to the other building, it was 909, which came out not too long ago. And I hit on that.
I think she's still playing those numbers.
Yeah.
During the 1950s, Goodrich expanded its production with operations in 21 countries, and a decade later, sales revenue was at an all-time high. However, in 1969, rising labor costs and the increase of imported foreign goods forced B.F. Goodrich to close its hood rubber division, marking the end of a monument of sorts to the establishment of the Armenian community of Watertown.
We were all broken-hearted. You know what a feeling it is to know that you're not going to have a job?
That was a great loss. I missed it. I never thought it would end. Who would come to that after all those years?
It was such an integral part of the town of Watertown and its makeup that when it left, even though we had progressed from where it was so dependent on the hood rubber, it was a blow to the community.
Chiba.
Roger asked me, for example, one of the questions he asked me is the impact of the Hood Rubber Company on the neighborhood. And I, a little puzzled, I said, impact on the neighborhood? I said, the Hood Rubber Company was the neighborhood.
The Hood Rubber was also, you know, had a lot of interaction with the town of Watertown. Because it was such a large employer, there was overlap there, and several of our selectmen, I remember Larry Walsh and I remember Pat Ford, served as selectmen, and they were executives in the Hood Rubber Company.
And the fact that the Hood Rubber Company had a great impact on this community long after the company closed here in 1969, almost 40 years ago.
I, of course, was aware of the Hood Rubber Company, but I had no idea how important it was to the Armenian community.
They were thrilled to be here and thrilled to be working and thrilled to have their families and their church and their community. And their world really revolved around East Watertown. Yep. And some members of my family, some relatives, some uncles never had licenses, never had a car. Their whole world was right around East Watertown, Hood Rubber, Lewis and Shepherd, the Arsenal, etc.
We can reflect on the good things that came out of it. I mean, there were a lot of bad things environmentally, but as a culture, we developed the Armenian culture in Watertown heavily because they came to East Watertown and they got their jobs.
I know my Aunt Arika, you know, I know that she's on this film. I do know that she worked very hard at the Hood Rubber. Well, she was then the primary breadwinner for a large amount of the time.
I look at it this way, that who in the world was going to give me a job? I couldn't speak English, I couldn't read and write. At least Hood Rubber gave me a job that I lived on with my family.
They paid very well, but I used to turn it all in. I never kept it. I never complained. Never.
It was hard having a working mother. You missed a lot.
Yeah, well, so. I sacrificed a lot too.
Yeah.
My mother, Claire Moser, she worked for a few years at the Hood Rubber Company testing batteries. She worked there during the war years. My mother took and still takes, in her 99 years of age presently, a lot of pride in what she did.
When I graduated, because I couldn't make the rehearsal for one of the chorus, my music teacher said, if whoever doesn't attend will not sing graduation day. So I couldn't go for rehearsal because I was needed. Being a spare, you got to be there in case someone's out. So I couldn't sing my graduation. That was a letdown.
My mother's uncle, John Million, who lived on School Street in Watertown, for his whole working career, which probably ended in the 1950s, he was an employee of Hood Rubber Company. And I went with him in the 1960s, he was then retired, to meet the personnel director. How deferential my mother's uncle was to this white-collar worker. A kind of humility that sort of bothered me, that he couldn't stand up for his own. But there was a sense in which the leadership of the administration of the factory looked down on his immigrant, and I had that feeling.
Even though we were born here, we were foreigners to the others. We felt comfortable being with the Armenian people as well as the Greek people. I have a very strong feeling for the Armenians. It'll never go away, Roger. It can't. It's instilled in me.
You ask about my impression of the Armenian community, Roger. And as a kid, what struck me was that, first of all, they were very closely knit. And I mean that in a positive sense, not in any way of negative. And also that they were achievement-oriented. And although I wasn't conscious of it at the time, it was real and it was there, and it did have an effect on me.
I couldn't have fun after school because I had to walk home from Watertown High to Crawford Street and then change my clothes and go to work. So I didn't have time to waste. I had to move. So I used to do a lot of running. That's why I can't run today.
I remember the first job I ever had was at the Watertown Arsenal, washing floors in the cafeteria. And a few of my friends were working at Crotty Brothers in the Hood Rubber, and they said, John, this is a better deal. You make more money, you work less hours. And yeah, I worked with a group of my friends there, and we all went to school together. We all hung around together, so it was more like fun than work. The only difference was we were at work together rather than at the East Junior Park together, you know.
In fact, the monies that I earned during the summer months, I think it accumulated to $60 for the 3 months. I had caused a little damage to my aunt's car that was learning how to drive. I caused about $60 worth of damage, so whatever I made at the Hood Rubber went towards that repair. So it was a lesson to me.
It was like a community in itself of people.
I still have their pictures.
They still keep in touch.
We still keep in touch.
You won't get any bad reports from the Hood Rubber. Anyone that talks about it usually gives you good reports.
Now they get them all. One time we used to make the money, now we're down there spending it.
You know, nowadays people say, I like my job, I don't like my job. I don't think anybody asked about that. I think they were just happy to have a job. These are people who came from the old country. These people who went through the Great Depression. To have a job was, you know, everything. Gave them a reason to live.
Hood Rubber did very good to many people who needed jobs. Where else could they go? They came from Italy, they came from Poland, they came from Armenia. That's the place that took everybody in.
Hood Rubber.